in a mine fraught with dangers.
They had a gas explosion, fire lasted 6 months.
Why did the miners create these amazing underground cathedrals?
Miners were very religious. They had chapels under the ground to pray for safety.
How are these life-saving shelters from World War II
They were amazing engineering construction.
turning into life support for the future?
What goes around comes around.
And what is the amazing history of the underground world hidden behind this castle?
We have two Slovenias. One Slovenia is on the surface, and other Slovenia is under the ground.
Beneath our feet lie extraordinary spaces, caves, and tunnels.
The span and the size is just crazy.
They've been designed and built by us,
This is the only one with a castle.
as well as formed by nature. But how were they created and adapted? By who and why?
You've got to face your fears.
Throughout history, subterranean life has captured our imagination.
I feel so privileged.
We're going further and deeper to unearth the mysteries, the stories, and the secrets of underground worlds. Poland lies in the center of Europe, east of Germany. It's home to 38 million people. Best known for its iron and steel industries, Poland's most famous historical export was salt, a mineral once considered more valuable than gold.
The income from only this mine provided 25% of all income in the state treasury.
But while many mines can be dark and spooky places, how did this one become such an incredible space filled with music?
For me, listening to the brass band playing so deep under the ground is magical.
What hazards did the miners have to overcome?
Chambers started to collapse, and every collapse in the mine makes sinkholes outside.
To create this world of wonder carved by hand?
There is nothing like this in the world.
The Wieliczka Salt Mine lies on the outskirts of Krakow in southern Poland. It opened in the 13th century, and for the next 700 years, the miners dug down 9 stories to a depth of 327 meters. There are 250 kilometers of tunnels and more than 2,000 chambers. And Kamil Broniowski, a chief foreman, knows their layout intimately.
Salt was taken out, an empty space was left behind.
What distinguishes Wieliczka above other mines is that once the salt was extracted, the empty voids were transformed into extraordinary spaces, a cathedral, 4 chapels, and galleries of statues and sculptures, all carved from salt by the miners.
Chambers were not created for the purpose of having an underground room, but they were more like a byproduct of the excavation process.
The mine was built to exploit rock salt deposits that were created around 13 million years ago, when a prehistoric sea evaporated. Patrycja Antoniak is an expert on the history of the mine.
The rock salt you can see here is the primary salt. The dark rock comes from the ancient sea. It is still possible to find fossils trapped in the rock, fossilized remains of plants and animals.
Before the mine was built to process prehistoric rock salt, local people had found the mineral rising to the surface in pools and lagoons in the local countryside.
For many centuries, the local people produced salt by evaporation of brine, salty water. When the sources of the salty water on the surface were almost exhausted, they started digging, sinking wells, hoping to find brine under the ground. On the bottom of one of them, they found rock salt, the first lump of the grey rock salt.
What they found is halite, a crystalline form of sodium chloride.
This is a salt crystal, cubic in form. Salt crystallizes in cubes always, and the salt crystals are perfect cubes. In the past, salt was very, very expensive. 600 years ago, 1/3 of the Polish state income came from salt, 36%. Salt was used to preserve food, that's why it was very, very precious. There is nothing like this in the world.
The mine grew quickly. Working in extremely challenging conditions, men used basic hand tools to dig into the unknown for the precious salt. The mine employed over 300 workers and produced over 7,000 tons of salt per year.
In the Middle Ages, the salt from the Wieliczka Salt Mine was considered to be the best salt in Europe. The miners produced blocks of salt weighing over a ton.
By the 16th century, the miners were winching out 2-ton blocks with the help of horses. At any one time, there would be 100 horses in the mine, and many of them spent their entire lives underground.
So there were stables on different levels. The miners would bring food for them, hay, oat, water to drink. In the 18th century, the mine produced about 30,000 tons of salt a year, and at the peak in the 20th century, more than 250,000 tons a year.
Falling salt prices meant that commercial mining stopped here in the 1990s, but the end of the industry coincided with the rise of tourism. UNESCO made the mine a World Heritage Site in 1978. Now visitors from all over the world marvel at the chapels and sculptures created by the workforce in their free time.
The miners were very religious. They had chapels under the ground to pray for safety, and the chapels were illuminated better than the other chambers.
There are 15 chandeliers around the mine. Their frames are made of wood and decorated with strings of pure rock salt. In a painstaking process, the sculptors shaped them, giving them a beautiful glass-like finish. The largest and most stunning of all is in the chapel of Saint Kinga, with 2,500 crystals.
Before a service in the chapel, a miner would lower a chandelier on a rope to light candles.
The chapels contain carvings which are almost a century old. Jesus and his disciples at the Last Supper took 9 years to carve, from 1936 to 1945. It's inspired by Leonardo da Vinci's Renaissance painting. Elsewhere, there are chambers with carvings of everything from gnomes to local heroes. The Janowitz chamber has a set-piece tableau called The Great Legend, carved in 1967. It's the story of a Hungarian princess who became a local saint.
Princess Kinga came to Kraków in 1243. Now the legend says that when she was about to leave Hungary, she asked her father to give her something as a wedding gift for the Polish nation. At the time in Poland we had no salt mines, and salt was very expensive because it was used for food preservation. Hungary was rich in salt, they had many salt mines, so her father, the King of Hungary, gave her one of the mines.
It's believed Princess Kinga dropped her engagement ring into the mine, which was later found in the first lump of salt extracted from Wieliczka.
Salt was produced in this area since the Neolithic period, so for over 5,500 years. But excavations began in the 13th century, so more or less at the same time that she came to Kraków.
The tradition of carving statues from rock salt continues to the present day in the mine's ground-level workshop.
This is Tadeusz Kościuszko, one of our national heroes, and his soldiers. And here, a miner from the Middle Ages. And on this side, here we have a symbol of the mine, the tools the miners used to excavate the chambers hundreds of years ago, a pickaxe and a mallet. And on the top there is Polish eagle. The whole statue is made out of the rock salt from the mine. However, the crown is made of the purest salt, similar to the crystals used to decorate the chandeliers, for example.
Not only did the purest salt in the mines find its way into statues, it could be crushed and refined by hand, ready for use in the home.
Some workers were called salt crakers. They were supposed to crush salt to the powder with these bats to produce fine salt, table salt.
It is really hard.
You don't need to clean this salt. This is eatable salt. You can normally use it for cooking, preserving food. It's like table salt. This is what happened with salt when you crush it to the powder. It's not gray.
As the mine grew over the centuries, so did the risks involved in maintaining this enormous subterranean world.
They had gas explosions, fires and shaft collapses. Once in 1648, the wood caught fire from the torch, which started a big fire in this mine. The fire lasted 6 months. After they cut off the fire, they couldn't start working for next year because of smokes and dangerous gases. Chambers started to collapse. Big blocks of salt fell down to the ground on both sides, and every collapse in the mine makes sinkholes outside at the same time, so it's also a serious problem outside.
Another hazard was methane gas. When it reaches levels of more than 5% concentration, it becomes highly flammable. The smallest spark would cause it to explode.
They employed a special group of workers called gas burners. So gas burners were always sent first to the mine, and they burned gas with torches on sticks. And they were looking for the gas at the ceiling because gas is lighter than air and goes up to the top of chambers, so they had to crawl on the floor or walk on their knees to avoid the gas explosions, but they risked their lives every time. So it was a really dangerous job. These people wanted to do it for good money because it was also a very well-paid job.
During the early 19th century, miners were issued with the revolutionary Davy lamp. The design prevented the risk of explosion and had other benefits too.
They didn't give much light, but they were able to detect the presence of gas. The flame inside changed the color and informed miners about the dangers.
The lamp flame burns inside a screen of wire mesh. The mesh lets in the air needed to keep the flame burning as a light source, but stops it from igniting flammable gas in the tunnel.
It was 1825 when they started using Davy's lamps.
As well as methane gas, another risk to the miners' safety was water. To prevent the risk of flooding and collapse, the miners built channels to drain the water away to pools and lakes deep in the mine.
Wooden half-pipes were mounted, and then using gravity, water was directed from the point where the leakage occurred to one of the shafts of the mine.
Wood was also used to support the largest chambers and the ever-growing collection of salty chandeliers. Whereas metal would have corroded in the damp, salty environment, the wood turned rock solid.
For centuries, wood has been used to support ceilings of chambers in salt mines. Salt preserves it. The oldest wooden constructions we can find in the mine are 400 years old.
The risk of roof collapse was a constant danger. Certain types of timber were useful to the miners because they would make cracking sounds under the strain. They would serve as an early warning system.
There is about 2 million cubic meters of the wood in the mine. The first miners used a lot of pine and spruce to build the constructions as they make a lot of noise cracking. Using wood, which makes a lot of noise cracking, was the first alarm system of the mine.
At the center of this giant timber web lie chambers which are now used to host numerous cultural activities.
The brass band in the mine in Wieliczka started in 1830. It's a tradition, almost every Polish mine has a brass band.
The band was formed to entertain rich sightseers, such as the Austrian Emperor Franz Joseph I in 1851. They played this popular Austrian tune, the Radetzky March, in his honor.
For me, listening to the brass band playing so deep under the ground is magical.
After 700 years of industry and craft, the miners of Wieliczka have left behind an incredible legacy and one of the most beautiful man-made underground worlds in Europe. The UK's capital, London, home to more than 8 million people, squeezed into just 1,500 square kilometers. Beneath its busy streets lies a network of tunnels made of steel and concrete, constructed to protect its citizens from the dangers of World War II.
Here's the entrance, topped with 5 feet of reinforced concrete.
For years, this subterranean structure has been left untouched.
Down here is a hidden world, and there are artifacts here still from its original use.
What remains of these huge subterranean facilities
74 years later, I think.
that provided refuge for a generation of Londoners?
So welcome back to the Clapham Deep Level Shelter.
And how are visionary farmers reusing this amazing space to enhance the future of food production?
We can create the optimum environment for growing, get up to 60 harvests a year.
Britain declared war on Germany in 1939. The conflict raged for 6 years and changed millions of lives forever. While most of World War II was fought in Europe and the Pacific, the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, brought death and destruction to the streets of Britain, especially in London.
Throughout 1940, the Germans bombed heavily many cities, but London in particular. And the people really needed shelter from that threat.
Here in Clapham, South London, subterranean historian Martin Dixon is about to enter an underground world that few Londoners are aware of.
The country was desperate to find accommodation to shelter the public. By 1940, they decided they needed a radical solution, and as a consequence, they built 8 deep-level shelters for the general public. Each was to house 9,600, and this, at Clapham Common, is the entrance to one of them.
From 1940 to 41, 8 deep-level shelters were built underneath London. There were 4 north of the River Thames and 4 south.
Partially with the idea that post-war they could be linked together into an express rail service underneath the capital.
The Clapham Common shelter is hiding in plain sight, right in the middle of a South London high street.
Here's the entrance, protected by a solid pillbox, because the shaft was the most vulnerable part of the network, topped with 5 feet of reinforced concrete. There were attempts to make the exact location secret, I guess to make sure that they weren't specifically targeted by German bombing. But in a sense, having a secret shelter is pretty pointless, because you want, you know, the top side of 80,000 people to actually know where they are and be able to efficiently enter.
On hearing London's air raid sirens, thousands of people would have raced for cover in these deep tunnels, always at short notice.
People say that rather than being frightening to go underground, it was very reassuring. And when you see the photos of the damage that came as a result of the Blitz, you can imagine that coming underground and hearing the sort of reassuring rumble of the Northern Line was actually quite a comforting place to be. And in general, if it's warm above ground, then it's cooler here, and if it's cool above ground, it's warmer here. So it was probably quite a pleasant temperature as well. So in less than 2 years, in the middle of a major war, they were amazing engineering construction.
The shelters lie 30 meters below the surface. That's twice as deep as the London Underground tube system.
And at this level, shelterers would be safe from any conventional bombing.
Each shelter was split into 2 levels by a mezzanine floor.
To get into the shelter is almost 200 steps, and although there's a lift, that was only really available for supplies and for catering. All of the shelterers would have to use the spiral staircases to get into the shelter.
Getting underground quickly was a matter of life and death. These ingenious stairwells layered 2 separate staircases within the same shaft.
Because there are 2 levels, to try and increase the speed with which the shelterers could enter, there are actually 2 spiral staircases interleaved. This one leads to the lower floor, and the one above eventually leads to the upper floor.
Skilled tunneling experts from all over the UK were brought in to construct the shelters.
Mostly it was hand dug, done largely by miners because they had the skill in excavation.
Each shelter took a year to dig out. The miners started with the 2 vertical shafts, which now contain the stairs, then cross passages, and finally the main shelter tunnels. It's the same technique used to build a regular tube station, just further down.
For every advance in the shaft, that the miners would insert 1 more segment, therefore protecting themselves and the structure from collapse. As it was extended downwards, these 2-foot wide segments were inserted to provide stability for the whole structure.
Not only did the miners employ the same tunneling techniques used to build the tube network, they also used the same cast iron construction materials.
Virtually all of the tunnels are lined with what you might regard as standard London Transport tunnel linings. And LPTB, London Passenger Transport Board, shows that it was a standard London transport segment reused for the emergency war work. So they were, if you like, diverted from tube construction and used for this shelter.
100 meters inside the shelter, there are still signs of the working infrastructure.
So this looks like the entrance to the original plant room. Yep. Down here would have been all the ventilation gear to make sure that there was a supply of clean air for the shelters. There would have been electricity and also water and wastewater in order to provide those necessities. The total length of each site is about 400 metres, 420 metres. So collectively, taking it end to end, there was about a mile of shelter space within each structure.
Bunk beds were built along the walls. People were expected to bring their own bedding.
And then on top of that, there was the facility for toilets, for catering, first aid or medical posts and so on.
Given the size of the Clapham Common shelter and the 7 other deep shelters in London, it's remarkable how invisible they are to citizens today.
So up above we've got the tube train rumbling away, and further up we've got Clapham High Street, which is a busy thoroughfare, thousands of people passing and repassing. Yet down here is a hidden world.
Northern Line trains pass overhead every few minutes, carrying thousands of passengers over the shelter.
But to go right up there, through that brick wall, that's Clapham Common Tube Station.
When work began on building the shelters in 1940, the Royal Air Force was slowly winning the battle of the skies. The Luftwaffe conceded defeat after losing more than double the number of planes than the British. 2 years later, when the shelters were finally ready, it seemed as if they might not be needed after all.
The immediate threat of the German air attacks had reduced somewhat. The other reason is the government still had the concern that if people went into this sort of shelter, that they developed some form of, I think they called it deep shelter mentality, meaning that they would retreat into themselves and that it would take away some of their fighting spirit, if you like.
Within 2 years, the Germans had developed new weapons in vengeance for Allied bombing raids on Germany.
In June 1944, the Germans launched their attack of the V weapons. First off, the V1 flying bomb, or the Doodlebug. Seeing the devastation that could potentially cause to London, the government did decide to open the shelters to the public.
New deep shelters built for this emergency were put to use and saved the lives of thousands of people.
There are very few Londoners still around who remember the experience of racing down into the Clapham Common shelter. But 92-year-old Joyce will never forget these wartime experiences.
I remember my father coming in and saying, "We're at war."
Londoners grew to fear the V1 flying bombs.
When they got those buzz bombs, you'd hear the noise of the engine, and then when it stopped, you knew it was coming down.
Hundreds of homes, hospitals, and public buildings were hit.
Joyce's family home was damaged when one of the V1 bombs exploded nearby.
The front door was blown right down the passage.
For the first time in 3/4 of a century, Joyce is making her way back to the Clapham Common shelter, where she once took refuge from the Nazi buzz bombs. And Martin's going to show her around.
Joyce, it's lovely to meet you. Tell me what it was like living in London during the war.
Well, it was very hectic. You never knew if you're going to be safe.
When you stayed in the underground shelters, what was that like for the first time?
Oh, well, it was quite good. You got a good night's sleep.
Yes, yeah. Shall we go inside now?
Yes.
Does this seem familiar, coming back after all these years?
Yes, a bit.
In those days, were you allowed to use the lift?
No, I had to walk all down the stairs.
Someone told me it's 180 stairs down. There we go.
Right.
Well, 74 years later, I think. So welcome back to the Clapham Deep Level Shelter.
Oh, it's a relief to get away from the planes and the guns.
When you were down here, how did it feel like going back to the surface in the morning? What were your feelings then?
Was your home still there?
I guess for some people, their homes would have gone.
Yes.
Since the war ended, few uses have been found for these old deep-level shelters. But now, part of the Clapham Common Refuge bears a passing resemblance to a sci-fi movie set.
If the people who built this could see what it's being used for today, I don't think they'd believe it.
15 meters below the northern line, there now lies an underground world that's dedicated to growing food.
What an amazing transition from World War II to space-age cultivation.
The new use for this World War II air raid shelter could herald the beginning of a new era in food production.
Growing Underground is an urban farm. It's situated 33 metres underneath the streets of Clapham, London. We use hydroponics and LEDs to produce microgreens, which are tiny herbs packed full of flavour.
This installation is at the forefront of an exciting new global trend for underground farming.
And initially we looked at overground spaces, but the underground worked really well for us because it's an insulated space and we have 100 foot of soil above us. We've got a consistent temperature of about 15 degrees year round. We can create the optimum environment for growing.
Fresh herbs are in demand all year round. Many have a large carbon footprint because they are imported by air and road and are highly perishable. This farm delivers to London's food markets just a few miles away.
This product conventionally comes in out of season from places like Israel or Egypt. So it's reducing food miles and pollution from large vehicles coming into the capital. And in turn, this actually reduces food waste by giving our customers a longer shelf life.
This shelter once protected the vulnerable. Now it's being repurposed to nourish the growing urban population. Is this the future of farming?
We power the site entirely by renewable energy and we're working towards carbon neutrality. How we are going to use waste products like CO2 or grey water really sort of resonated with me.
Other countries, including the USA and China, are also looking at ways to repurpose their disused subterranean spaces and for ways to feed their ever-growing populations.
It's phenomenal to know how much space is available. Thinking about how future cities are going to feed and power themselves with this growing population that we expect to have an extra 2 billion people on the planet by the middle of this century.
These deep shelters came about through resourceful planning and saved the lives of thousands of Londoners in their time of need.
I think it's somehow nice that what originally was beds for people has become beds for produce, so what goes around comes around.
This shelter could be improving our lives for many years to come.
There's a lot of locals that perhaps don't even realise this big space is underneath them.
Slovenia, a mountainous country bordered by Austria, Croatia and Italy. Its modest landmass contains no less than 39 peaks, and beneath them, a region of limestone gorges, caves and underground rivers known as a karst. For centuries, the Slovenians have relied on this magical underground world for protection from the elements and from invaders. But who was the first to chart these subterranean passages as a means of survival?
We can say that Erasmus was the first cave explorer in Slovenia.
What underground secrets are hidden behind this incredible castle perched on a mountainside?
They got water into the castle that was fresh, clean, and completely safe.
And who were the experts preserving and mapping the caves for future generations to enjoy?
In Slovenia, we say that we have two Slovenias. One Slovenia is on the surface, and other Slovenia is under the ground.
Prajama Castle in southwest Slovenia is the starting point of a 14-kilometer subterranean system in an area which boasts 4 stunning caves eroded by underground rivers. The first of these breathtaking chambers is a fantastic secret, hidden away behind the 16th century battlements of Prajama Castle. This impenetrable fortress, which covers the cave mouth, is perched on a cliff face 123 meters high. Sergej Karish knows the fascinating history of why it was built and what it conceals.
It is officially the biggest cave castle in the world.
The caves were first fortified by a medieval religious order before passing into the ownership of the House of Habsburg, one of the great royal dynasties of Europe.
They built the castle here to make this road safer.
The underground site was ideal because of its strategic position on an important trade route, linking the Central European heartlands with the Adriatic Sea.
And one of the inner walls of the castle is a natural wall. It's much easier to defend the castle from just one side. It's also perched in the middle of this vertical wall. It was pretty much impossible to enter the castle from any other place but through the main door. If you go to the top of the cliff, it's completely hidden as a safe place. This was always a perfect choice.
Starting from this crevice deep in the limestone cliff, new stages of fortification were added step by step over 3 centuries. Each improvement embellished the caves with layers of secrecy and security.
The last part of the castle was added in 16th century, so every century added something new.
The earliest castle was a confined and damp space, hardly the most comfortable place to live. When rebuilt in the 16th century, ingenious craftsmen came up with an early kind of cavity wall system, with voids of air between man-made and natural rock faces. The air pockets provided insulation, and the double walls effectively became a warren of hidden routes leading back into the caves.
There was a theory here that people of this castle have a system of secret passages so that they could move from one part of the castle to the other without being seen from outside.
The defensive and strategic value of these caves was exploited by their most famous resident, the knight Erasm Pujama, better known as Erasmus, a robber baron who lived here during the 15th century. Following a dispute with the Austrian emperor, Erasmus was sentenced to death, but he escaped into the cave system.
But eventually, the soldiers that the emperor sent found him and began with the siege. Now, he knew this castle very well, so he knew that he's going to be very safe here.
The caves offered Erasmus one big advantage, a natural supply of fresh water. Because it drips through the porous rock, it's safe from contamination by any attacker.
The ingenuity of people building the place is apparent. You have dripping water in any cave. They took advantage of what nature was already offering them. Okay, we can see the channels. This is part of the water supply system here in the castle. That's how they got the water from above, from the cave, to the lower parts of the castle where it was needed the most. They got water into the castle that was fresh, clean, and completely safe. It was impossible to poison it.
Erasmus may have had a continuous supply of clean water, but he needed food. The knight-errant had a cunning plan, which depended on the caverns behind his stronghold.
At the back of the castle, in the cave behind, Erasmus had a secret passage. Now, the secret passage comes out in the forest above the cave. It is impossible to find it from outside. Erasmus would use a secret passage to get food supplies into the cave.
The secret route was unknown to the emperor's soldiers. Erasmus used it to avoid their siege and continue his raids on neighboring towns. With the castle fully supplied, he would taunt the soldiers by sending food down to them,
kind of showing them that there's absolutely nothing they could do to him. They had no idea that it would be possible to have a secret passage in the solid rock. So for them, according to the legend, a much more logical explanation was that there were some dark forces on his side.
Of course, Erasmus wasn't a magician, just a devious robber baron who made capital from these extraordinary and beautiful caves.
The most important part about that passage is that it's not just a cave, that it was a lifeline during this siege.
The legend of the secret passage has been a lifetime inspiration to cave explorer Marian Villar.
I was impressed when I was a boy here looking at this big cliff and this beautiful castle. When I started with cave exploration, the cave under the castle was my first cave that I visited. We can say that Erasmus was kind of a first cave explorer in Slovenia. At that time, they were using candles, maybe some oil lanterns, and this was it. It was a big challenge for him to go out. He was kind of a revolutionary at that time for caving.
Now Marian retraces the difficult climb that Erasmus once took by candlelight. It's a stunning cave network, eroded by fresh water over millions of years. The secret passage is almost vertical and extends for 42 meters from the rear of the castle cave up to the forest above the cliffs.
Dimensions narrow. We're talking about in some squeezes just a few centimeters away from your chests. For Erasmus was not an easy task to go all the way up to the surface. Today, with the modern technology, we have good equipment, not easy, but years back when Erasmus was walking around the candle, crazy times.
Yes, we can see the exit right here, in front of us, going up.
He was going towards the valley, around 15 kilometers from here, for the supplies and food. Definitely it was not easy to bring all the supplies through the narrow passage all the way to the castle. The castle was hidden, the exit right here was really hidden, so this was the best hiding place.
The caves of Pajama lie at the start of a major system. Marian has great knowledge of two chambers that lie 9 kilometers further into the system, worn out over millennia by the river Puka.
Here in Slovenia, we say that we have two Slovenias. One Slovenia is on the surface, and other Slovenia is under the ground. Never in my life I'll explore all the caves in Slovenia.
Slovenia has more than 13,000 caves, and experts believe there are many more yet to be discovered.
At the beginning of cave exploration, there are different stories and legends of devils possessing the caves. In Middle Ages, the people actually thought that cave is the portal door of hell.
The Black Cave is around 3 kilometers in length. It was discovered in the 19th century when the ceiling collapsed into a sinkhole. The cave was named after sooty deposits, which have stained the calcite formations a dark gray when they were once white.
The theory is that the first cave explorers, when they entered the cave, used lanterns, candles, torches, and all this smoke deposit on formations, and that's why we can see the black color.
The neighboring cave, the Puka Cave, is 65 meters below the surface and takes its name from the river which created it.
It's 5 kilometers in length. This is known as an active cave. The water is flowing, eroding the rock, and actually shaping the cave. It's important to know in which direction the water is flowing, so we need to protect the water, and if we know the cave better, then we can protect them this way.
The Black Cave and the Puka Cave are the last two on the river before it disappears into inaccessible depths, at least 150 meters below the surface. The Piuca then reappears flowing towards Slovenia's capital, Ljubljana, 50 kilometers away.
Some of the caves are also show caves, so it's good to show people what is underground, that people can appreciate nature and they can also protect and respect the nature for future generations.
Experts like Mayan are proud to show tourists the beauty of these underground caverns. But free access to some of them has been restricted to ensure the caves are not damaged by visitors. The Atoshka cave is now only accessible with an official guide.
The first visitors, when they enter in the cave, take some souvenirs out, some rocks and so on. There was some damage being done inside.
When Atoshka was first discovered a century ago, it looked magnificent, packed with hundreds of stalactites just like these in the neighboring cave. But in the last 100 years, most of Atoshka's stalactites have been snapped off and stolen by souvenir hunters, while graffiti and paint was daubed on precious formations that had taken millennia to develop. Mayan is going to show Sergeja the damage.
So here we can see some old signatures, and the dates, they go back 1923. So of course, this means pollution to the underground, pollution to the cave. Some signatures can be inside caves for many hundreds, even thousands of years.
A few names written on a wall may not seem that big a deal, but the beauty of this glittering surface has now been tarnished. It could take many decades for the delicate crystalline formation to grow back over it. And for new stalactites to form over these snapped-off stumps will take 100 years per centimeter.
It takes time, 2,000–3,000 years, so it will heal up and become a more beautiful cave.
Slovenia's precious cave heritage is worth protecting.
The most special thing for me about these caves are these crystals.
Crystallization happens when calcite is left behind in the dry limestone.
You point a light, and it's like it comes to life with that glittering, with that sparkling. And for me, that is always a very special feeling. It's almost like it's not real. It's so nice to see this cave healing. I think it's an important lesson that we can preserve cave for generations and generations to come.
The Atoshka cave was formed by the Piuca River thousands of years ago, but the fast-flowing water gradually wore out a new route underneath. To see this river below, one must trek far deeper into Atoshka.
It's getting louder and louder. It's difficult to hear.
You can see the river flowing. Yeah, I'm closer here.
Wow.
So you can see the water level here on the line on the wall.
So it really can be much higher than it is at the moment.
No, it can be 8–9 meters higher than it is now.
The Piuca River races through these underground caverns at speeds of up to 40 kilometers per hour, continuing its remarkable work of thousands of years, carving out new underground worlds.
It is kind of special to see the river in the cave and be so close to it.
Here in Slovenia, we have a long history of cave exploration, going all the way back of time of Erasm Predjamski, who was walking in the Predjama castle cave. So we need to understand Slovenian underground to simply preserve it.
These underground worlds were here long before man ever walked this earth, and will still exist once we are gone. For years, we have used them for shelter, protection, and survival. As we look into the next century, it is our turn to protect these precious subterranean spaces.